On this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, the Detroit Pistons have two roster spots open after Lindy Waters departs for the San Antonio Spurs. Cam Thomas is a betting favorite to be a Detroit Piston. All of that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. Let's get it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing. Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. It's myself, Aaron Johnson, and joining me this week is Jasper Apollonia. And look, the end of July is the beginning of the dog days of the NBA offseason. Once you get past those, first 2-ish weeks of free agency and summer league wraps up, it just seems like the news cycle really slows down, because you get a lot of news stories out of summer league, out of all of these executives and scouts and coaches and players and agents. All of them being in Vegas creates a ton of buzz, and there's a ton of stuff that happens while summer league's going on. But now that it's over, it feels like we have really hit that patch of the offseason where it makes you very much so ready for basketball to be back. We've got sometimes some months before that's the case, but don't worry, Jasper and I are still going to bring you a good show here today, and we'll continue to bring you content from Palace of Pistons throughout the entire offseason. Got some pretty cool stuff coming down the pipeline. But Jasper, I think we have to start with probably the biggest story in the NBA over the last few days. Lindy Waters is no longer a Detroit Piston. He was an unrestricted free agent. There was not a whole lot of talk about his free agency, it felt like. And then all of a sudden, Shams, I'm not even going to try right now. My tongue's not working. Shams tweeted that Lindy Waters is signing with the San Antonio Spurs. Is the season over? Should the Pistons cancel basketball before it even starts back up?
I haven't felt this betrayed since, since looking at that video of that guy whose girlfriend said that she would cheat on him with Lindy Waters. All-timer, by the way. It's like, I would never leave my girl for nobody. And she's like, Barry Sanders Jr. is kind of hot. It's one of my favorites ever. But yeah, this is a loss for the Pistons for sure. I can't say it's necessarily the most devastating one, despite how we opened this show. And how do I know that? Well, I'll be honest with you, Aaron. I kind of forgot Lindy Waters was on the Pistons until he signed with the San Antonio Spurs. Yeah. He had actually some nice minutes, I thought, for the Pistons last year. He showed that he was willing and able to come in and just put up shots. And frankly, that's what you got to do. That's the hardest thing I think to do in the NBA, is to be a guy who plays very limited minutes like that. And you're expected to just come in and produce. And he did a really good job of that with Detroit last year. He's done that when asked to in the past as well. He did it with Golden State. He had some nice minutes for them. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him have not a big role, but a role with the San Antonio Spurs. But really, I think for me, the way this affects the Pistons the most is now they have two open roster spots. And, you said before the show, one of the things you expected, you kind of thought Dennis Jenkins might have shown enough in Summer League to get one of those roster spots. Doesn't sound like that is happening. He's on a two-way now. Obviously, they can convert that to a regular deal, but Chaz Lanier is on the roster. He's a full-on guy, but Aaron, I missed our Summer League conversations, but I think we're all in agreement here. Chaz Lanier did not exactly look like a guy who was ready to step into the rotation day one for the Pistons. He looks like a guy who's going to be probably playing for the Crews at some point this year. Really, I think coming out of Summer League, the two biggest standouts, and this is my 2 cents on it because you guys obviously talked about it while I was gone, but Ron Holland definitely looks like he's ready to take a step forward. Dennis Jenkins looks like he might be able to get some minutes this year, depending on what happens with Marcus Sasser or what happens with these 2 open roster spots. And lastly, Bobby Klintman. I still think there's an NBA player in there, but not this year. So it doesn't seem like anybody from that Summer League team is going to be joining the Pistons on a full-time basis. Tolo Smith, again, another guy who showed some stuff, but he showed the stuff you expect Tolo Smith to do. And that's not necessarily an NBA player. So, Aaron, I think the bigger question when it comes to this Lindy Waters situation is not how do the Pistons necessarily replace Lindy Waters, because frankly, there's not that much to replace there, but they have 2 open roster spots, and we've talked about them, who they might bring in for that last roster spot. We don't necessarily know yet, but it appears as if there is a front runner as of right now for one of those roster spots, isn't there?
There is one name that has come up. This is the Pistons are the odds-on favorite to land him, according to an unnamed betting operations. No free ads here. But by the way, subscribe to palaceofpistons.com. Our link to the Substack is in the show notes. It's completely free. You get all our content sent to you directly to your email inbox. And then while you're at it, why aren't you hitting the subscribe button? Why aren't you hitting the follow button on Spotify or on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, wherever you're watching or listening to the show from? Come on. Check those 2 boxes off and you're good to go to keep on listening here. It takes maybe combined, it takes 30 seconds to do both of those things, subscribing to the Substack and subscribing or following wherever you're watching or listening to the show on. But
you look like a fool if you don't. I mean,
yeah, especially in the summer. If you're here listening, that means you are a diehard.
Which by the way, I have to say, I do love how our numbers crept up over the last month and a half, because I know you people out there, you're sickos. And now that you don't have actual NBA basketball to watch, you're like, how am I going to get my Pistons fixed? You're just like me. I used to, when I was in high school, during the summertime, I would just scour the internet for anything I could find. And so I have to say, if you're just like us and you're one of those sickos, we salute you. We love you. Subscribe. Don't be a fool.
Absolutely. 100%. But back to what is probably the most intriguing conversation of the show today is the Pistons are the betting favorites to land Brooklyn Nets restricted free agent Cam Thomas. He is a 23-year-old guard that last year averaged 24 points and 3.8 assists in 31 minutes per game. Only played in 25 games for Brooklyn last year. He got hurt, and there was not a whole lot of incentive for for Brooklyn to bring him back. They were definitely in tank mode. But the year before that, he was productive as well, 22.5 points per game, just under 3 assists, and shot 36% from the 3-point line. This is an intriguing name in terms of NBA players. Cam Thomas is probably one of the most polarizing names that is still out there on the market. I will open this discussion by saying I am not one of the people that has the opinion that Cam Johnson is just a net negative NBA player. I know there are people out there that
Cam Thomas.
Yeah, that's what did I say Cam Johnson?
You said Cam Johnson, and I get the feeling it's not going to be the only time. I just got to catch it now.
I've been doing that. I've been doing it in the podcast group chat talking about this discussion. But Cam Thomas, he is there are people that think he's just a net negative. He just scores, unproductive points and whatnot. And he's played for a horrid team since he's been in the league. But I'm not saying he's a no fault player. He does have issues. He does have areas of his game that he needs to grow in. But I mean, what he can do in terms of scoring is incredibly intriguing. And I don't know if that there's a fit with the Pistons per se, but I also would not I'm not going to sit here and say, don't sign Cam Thomas because he's not a valuable player to a winning team. I don't believe that narrative yet.
No, same here. And we've said this so many times on this podcast. Context matters. Remember when we were killing the Pistons for using Isaiah Stewart as a power forward, 2 years ago, and people were like, why do you hate Isaiah Stewart? Why do you hate Isaiah Stewart? We don't. We never did. We hated the context he was used in. And I think Cam Thomas is one of those players where you have to dig a little bit deeper in order to understand exactly the type of guy he is and exactly how he can help and hurt your team. For me, I would fully be on board with the Pistons going after Cam Thomas. I think he would be a huge boon to their second unit. He is a dangerous scorer. And if you just look at the raw numbers, he looks like a guy who just, he scores because he shoots the ball a lot. And that is true to an extent. But you have to understand he took strides forward in his passing this year. He was a genuinely decent passer for the Nets as an off guard. And this wasn't him taking up like ball handling duties, like trying to play make for others. It just grew into a part of his game. The really important thing, though, Cam Thomas brings you is he is just, simply put, one of the best isolation scorers in the entire NBA. And that is a skill set that, when used properly, can be absolutely devastating for your team. We just saw in the playoffs, Dennis Schroeder, who is a decent player, carry the Pistons to at least one win because his isolation scoring was so crucial for them in those situations when teams were completely focused in on Cade Cunningham. Again, he's not a guy who's going to create a ton for others, but if he's creating for himself, he's 96th percentile as an isolation scorer amongst all NBA players. That's where he was this year. He's also a really effective handoff and spot up player, which is another thing that you look at in terms of, okay, yeah, he can create his own shot, but when he's having his shot created for him, how does he fare? Pretty good. And we've talked about how the Pistons do need more spot-up shooting. That is an area of the game Cam Thomas can help them in. So I look at the Pistons as being very much committed to this idea of we're going to stagger the Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey minutes. And one of the things we went into last year, Aaron, was saying that's great, but they still need that third guard. And we weren't sold on Marcus Sasser. Marcus Sasser, in my opinion, did not show enough during the season to convince me that he is that third guy. And we saw how much that third guard was needed when Jaden Ivey went down. That's why they got Dennis Schroeder. So the way I look at it is if you have Cam Thomas on your team, you can stagger him and Jaden Ivey off of each other, playing with Cade Cunningham. Totally, he can totally work as a secondary option while also being able to take up some of those ball handling duties in terms of scoring load. I think it behooves the Pistons, and I would not be surprised to see this happen this year. I do think Cade's scoring numbers are going to decrease this season. I don't think they're going to be as high as they were this last year because they need other players to take that load off of him a little bit. We saw it many times. The biggest, mark on his efficiency was just because he had to put up so much volume, especially at the rim. So having somebody like Cam Thomas who can get to the rim on his own, who can put that pressure on defenses and open up for other players, that's going to be huge. And I still think you can play him with Jaden Ivey if they're the one to punch there. You can give Jaden Ivey some of those playmaking reps without overextending him on that end of the floor. You can give Cam Thomas a little teeny tiny bit of responsibility there because he doesn't turn the ball over at a high rate. And this is another really key element in my analysis of him is he gets to the line. Like Cam Thomas, historically, for the last 2 years of his career, gets to the line 20% more often than the average NBA player. And that's on the Brooklyn Nets. That's not a team that's getting a whole bunch of foul calls. This is not a Lakers tax we're talking about here. Like, he gets to the line legitimately, and he gets to the line at a very, very high rate. So I think Cam Thomas really, if you can get him at the right price, and this is why getting that trade exemption from Sacramento was an important asset, you can absorb his contract in just by trading like Marcus Sackerser and maybe a couple second-round picks. And you can sign him to a decent contract while still staying under the cap, which continues to leave you financially flexible. So when I look at it, yeah, I think Cam Thomas is a really good fit in Detroit. Obviously, the issue here is his defense, and he is a bad defender. Let's not get it twisted. Like his playmaking, he made some strides there, but he is still not good at that end of the floor. And I think that's the number one thing where you look at it and go, I don't know about that. I'm worried about him and Jaden Ivey from a defensive standpoint. I think that's definitely the biggest worry there. But when you see what he brings to you offensively, and especially on that second unit, how they can surround him with really good defensive pieces in Ron Holland and in Isaiah Stewart, like, you can make that work, I think, defensively, as long as they're smart and as long as they continue to have the buy-in to the system that JB Bickerstaff has set up.
Yeah, I would be super interested in knowing what a Cam Thomas contract looks like. I mean, I don't know if it's he's got to sign a 1-year prove-it kind of deal with a team that is in a winning position to show that he can make an impact and make a positive impact on a winning team, or if Brooklyn wants to re-sign him long-term, or there's another team that wants to get involved and sign him long-term. There aren't too many teams out there with cap space to work with, so it really only sets up for him to return to Brooklyn or to, be moved in a sign and trade type deal. But I'm absolutely interested if I'm Detroit. I look at Brooklyn's guard situation, and I got to think with, the 4 or 5 that they just drafted and whatever else they still have on their roster, they've got so many guards that they probably aren't super tied to Cam Thomas anyway. And it feels like if they wanted him, he would be back by now. So look, I think the isolation scoring that you talked about, I think the ability for him to play in a second unit where his role is pretty defined is ideal. And, going back to talking about his scoring and his shooting and stuff, you could talk about it, and I see the narratives online about him just being a shot chucker and things like that. But the thing is, he was a rather productive scorer last year. He wasn't inefficient. I mean, you look at his career stats, and he's he was 35% this year from 3, 36.5% last year. I know it's not crazy numbers, but he was a good 2-point shooter as well. Like, he is not just an inefficient guy launching shots on a bad team. He can score the basketball. So I'm definitely interested in Cam Thomas. And, I don't know how real this is. Like, we're going off a betting odds from a betting agency. Like, this could very much be an absolute nothing story, no substance to, the odds and anything like that. But it's the end of July. What else are you going to really talk about right now? So playing in the world where this is a legitimate story, I would not be opposed to Detroit being in on Cam Thomas. I think, though, last thing I'll say on this, I think it would have made a lot more sense had they not signed Karis LeVert. I just feel like there's going to end up being 3 guards between LeVert, Jaden Ivey, and then in theory Cam Thomas, who are all like, yeah, they can handle the basketball, but maybe they're better off playing as a secondary ball handler. So I don't know if that's an issue, but no, I think Detroit should at least be looking into Cam Thomas if they can get him in a sign and trade where it's the value is, they're not really giving up much. I would look into it. I think he could help them.
I think for me, like, I'm a little higher on Karis LeVert as a playmaker for others. I don't necessarily think that there would be – I see where you're coming from, because that is definitely something that can be an issue. It was an issue for the Pistons, I think, like 2012, like the Rodney Stuckey years. Like, you had a bunch of guys who could create a little bit, but nobody who was actually – I mean, that's why Will Bynum is still like a fan favorite. He was the only dude – for like 3 years who could create a shot for anybody else. But I do think that is like a legitimate concern. I am a little higher on Karis LeVert and Jaden Ivey, I think, as playmakers perhaps than you are, but I'm not disregarding that by any means. Cam Thomas is a shooting guard. To me, Jaden Ivey is a shooting guard. To me, Karis LeVert he doesn't have the body or necessarily the makeup. You don't think of him as a point guard, but he can and will create shots for others.
I get it.
But I get where you're coming from. I think for me, there is definitely a question though of defensive buy-in as well, and also attitude. I mean, he tweeted out a couple days ago. There's somebody saying something about him, not being that as dangerous of a scorer as he thinks he is, and him tweeting out well, then why does everybody double team me? And it's because they think that you're going to keep the ball in your hands and you're going to force up a bad shot or you're going to turn the ball over. You're not going to pass it to the guy who's open. That's why they, double team you. Teams don't throw very many double teams at Cade Cunningham because they know what's going to happen to them if they do. I think there's a mentality aspect to that. How does he fit in after being a guy who's been the focal point of an offense for the last 2 years? How does he come in and accept what is a secondary role? Even on a second unit, he's probably going to be in a secondary role. So I think, there's definitely questions there. But he does fit an archetype and he does fit a role. And as we've said, he is a guy who can spot up. He is a guy who is lethal as an isolation scorer. Yes, he throws up shots, but he's pretty efficient with them overall. So, and I think especially when you move him to a team with a creator like Cade Cunningham and a lot less focus on him, not getting those double teams all the time, I think you feel pretty good about that. That being said, he is, it is the end of July and trade rumors abound. You might remember me coming into our group chat last week and I had heard from somebody that there was a meeting going down with New York and Giannis's people, and 10 minutes after I tweet that, a betting site takes his odds off, and then the next day, nothing happens. So this is something that you have to treat more of as a thought exercise. Yeah. And to that end, I will throw out a couple more names of guys that I would still be interested in who are still free agents, who do fit that role in somewhat of a way. Maybe they fit what the Pistons need in a different manner. I think of somebody like Gary Payton II. If you need somebody who's more of a defensive guard coming in, we talked about that last year, why we kind of were thinking about somebody like Markelle Fultz or a Dennis Smith Jr. possibly. Markelle Fultz, by the way, still available as a free agent. Another guy I think of as well who fits kind of both those, who I like his defense, and I think he could bring you something as an offensive guy too. Amir Coffey. Frankly, I'm kind of shocked that he isn't on an NBA roster right now. I really like Amir Coffey as a second unit shooting guard.
I can't say I watched a ton of Clipper basketball over the last few years, but I feel like anytime he was in the game, he was productive.
Yeah, without question.
To back that up in front of me, but just from muscle memory, I feel like I remember him being a solid player.
Without a doubt, Aaron. I mean, he shot 30. What? Let me look at the numbers right now. He shot 40% from three last year. Career 38 from three.
And his last name is Coffee. How do you not get this?
Yeah, at least give him a cup, for God's sake. But I think of somebody like Amir Coffey, like Gary Payton. Those are guys who are probably going to cost you a similar amount of money. A Coffee might even be cheaper, who are unrestricted free agents.
I think a cup of coffee is getting pretty expensive nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. Try living in New York, buddy. It's $6.50 for a cold brew before tax. But yeah, there are still players available. I mean, even if you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, you still have DeLon Wright out there, or Campaign, or Monte Morris. I'd say throw some money at Quentin Grimes, but we know that's not happening. But yeah, so when I look at this, I think Cam Thomas is definitely an intriguing option. He is somebody that fits what the Pistons are still looking for. There are other options out there too. And one of the things that I do like about the offseason that the Pistons have, I do think they are more flexible than they were last year. Like, yeah, losing somebody like Malik Beasley hurts. But you have more versatility with Duncan Robinson, and you have more versatility with Karis LeVert as well. So I think they actually have like the ability. They do need to fill at least one of those roster spots. You can roll with 14. You don't have to have a full 15, but you do need to have 14. So somebody else is coming in.
Yeah, I was going to
It's just about like who they're going to bring in. What are they looking for? Right
I like, if you're talking about one roster spot, I like the idea of Cam Thomas. I like the idea of Cup of Coffee, Amir Coffee. And after that, I think I'm looking at a 4.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Enough guys that can kind of bounce between the 2 and 3. I think they need to look at getting a 4. Maybe, he doesn't really need to be a 5 because they're 3 deep at center with Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, and Paul Reed. But I look at the roster, and this goes back to some of the stuff that we talked about last week during our kind of summer league recap. Bobby Klintman, even if there is an NBA player in there somewhere, like you said at the top of the show, I don't think it's this year. I just think that between the lack of speed and athleticism, the lack of scoring acumen, I just don't know if it's going to happen. And it might happen, but I don't know if it happens with him getting minutes on an NBA playoff team and figuring it out on the fly. Like, I don't know if it happens in the G League. Like, he might need to land in an NBA with an NBA team where he can go play in the NBA and there just be that expectation that he's going to play and it's going to take some time. But most second-round picks aren't afforded that. So,
ironically, Aaron,
on him being a productive player for the Pistons this year.
The Nets would be a good landing spot, honestly, for somebody like Clinton. Yeah. And maybe you throw him into a sign and trade for like Cam Thomas. I think that's definitely there too. But you're 100% right. It's got to be like a Cam Thomas kind of like impact guard, or it's got to be a power forward.
Yeah.
Right. And to that end, you still have Trey Lyles available. You still have Chris Boucher available. Somebody I didn't throw out, and I wouldn't necessarily want him as far as a guard. Malcolm Brogdon is available. I don't know if I necessarily would pursue that, but like that's also there. But like, yeah, I mean, Chris Boucher available. Al Horford is. It could finally happen. Precious Achiuwa, I don't love.
I swear I said that last week too about Al Horford. Like, I remember when the Pistons were announced as the mystery team for Al Horford back during the Stan Van Gundy era. And then their consolation prize was John Lure, who forgot how to shoot 3-pointers. But maybe time is a flat circle. We come back and Al Horford's a Detroit Piston. One other name I'll throw out there. Actually, I'll throw out 2 more names. Bol was, I forget what betting site, but he was the Pistons were the betting favorite for Bol at one point. And then the last name I'll throw out there is Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who was, he doesn't have like a ton of. He's just never really had like a full-on role with a team for an extended period of time. He's kind of bounced around, but I think there's something there where it's like if he's your third string power forward, you could do worse. I don't know. But they need another bigger bodied 4. They have a lot of guys that are 2-3s. Oh, you could slide, Ron Holland or Duncan Robinson the 4 spot. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I do subscribe to the Palace of Pistons podcast. But I just think they need a bigger bodied 4 that's played the 4, that can defend some bigger 4s, things like that. Because outside of Tobias Harris, that's really it, unless the plan is to stagger Tobias Harris and Asar Thompson the way that they were staggering Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey last year.
Yeah, but that we saw the downside of doing something like that last year when Jaden Ivey went down and they had to make a move. That's why you get that next power forward. I'll throw one last name at you, and I think I'd be against it, but I'll just throw it at you. Ben Simmons.
I'm just going to say no.
Okay.
I can't be talked into it. It's not that maybe he helps them on the court. I don't know if I'll ever be able to get past like that saga in Philadelphia and all of the stories that came out of there. I just don't know if I could ever get past it. I mean, maybe there's some helpful things that he does. I can't say I've watched a lot of Ben Simmons. but I'll pass there. I
Yeah,
will.
totally fair. I mean, his body is not very effective at this point. Like, the injuries really caught up to him.
Yeah.
And then there's also like the mental aspect of it as well. Like, can you trust him to mentally fit in with this Pistons team? Like, I think of Cam Thomas. Yeah, sure, there are some questions I have about the way he approaches the game, let's say, but do I think he has that dog in him? Yeah. I do. And like, do I
the guy that will go 10 toes down and will go to battle when it comes time to?
Right. I feel like
would.
I feel very confident in the Pistons system right now. It really is absolutely incredible. And we will wrap this podcast up soon, but it is really incredible just how quickly JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon built like the identity of this team. It is unbelievable because that was one of the things with the Monty Williams era. It wasn't just that they were terrible. It's that they were terrible with no identity. Like, bad and growing into something is, you can live with that. Under Monty, they were just nothing. Right. And you saw it even in Summer League. Like, the way that the Pistons Summer League players play is the way that the main roster guys play. And to me, that is just got to give them another hand. Like, JB Bickerstaff, man, still should have won Coach of the Year. Like, it's just
absolutely. That one
just crazy. And when you look at it back now, it just, I mean, yeah, should have won Coach of the Year. The job he's done is just unbelievable. So if somebody could get that out of Cam Thomas and get him to buy in defensively and get him to understand his role on this team is going to push him and everybody else forward, I think JB Bickerstaff would be the guy to do it.
Yeah. Let us know what you think in the comments. Tweet us, comment on YouTube, on Spotify. Who do you want the Pistons to go after? They've got 2 main roster spots left. They filled up all their 2-way spots. They signed Colby Jones on Wednesday, and according to Amari Sankofa, Danish Jenkins and Tolu Smith will be on 2-ways, and they waived Ron Harper Jr., who was on a 2-way. He did not play in Summer League with Detroit. But that is going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're following. Let us know what you think of the show. We are, again, as we said, we've entered the dog days of the NBA offseason, but we're going to continue to find ways to bring you content and bring you some good stuff. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.